Well, welcome. This is wonderful to see you here tonight, and it is going to be a real honor for us to hear from Rabbi Garraway. This is the 8th annual World Interfaith Harmony Week lecture. This lecture series began 8 years ago under the direction of Grant Underwood, who was then the Richard L. Evans Chair of Religious Understanding. And it has been, for me, a real delight and a wonderful series to be a part of and to learn from our incredible speakers. You can see the previous speakers listed on the back of your program. I'm Andy Reed, and it is my pleasure to be a part of this tonight with you and with Rabbi Garraway, who's a dear friend of mine. We will begin tonight with an invocation by Jessica Robinson. Jessica is a student fellow on the Council for Interfaith Engagement here at BYU and has recently returned from a global tour of the world, I think is how we're calling it, of religious sites all over the world. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity to hear about her experiences. But she will offer the invocation. Following her, we will hear welcoming remarks from Justin Collings, who is the Academic Vice President for Brigham Young University. We want to express our appreciation to him and for his time being here tonight. We also recognize Renata Forste, who is the International Vice President for BYU. Following Vice President Collings, we will have Jason Combs, who's the Interim Ancient Near Eastern Studies Coordinator, who will introduce our tonight's speaker. And they have been associated together for a long time, and so I'm grateful that he's willing to do that. And after that, we will have our keynote address by Rabbi Joshua Garraway. Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica, for that prayer. On behalf of Brigham Young University, it's my honor to welcome all of you to this 8th annual Interfaith Harmony Lecture. Grateful for Andy Reed, who has recently assumed the Richard L. Evans Chair of Religious Understanding. On a Super Bowl week, he's only the second most famous Andy Reed in the United States, but he's always our favorite. And grateful for his leadership, grateful to have Grant Underwood with us, and also want to acknowledge the memory of the inaugural occupant of the Richard L. Evans Chair was Professor Truman G. Madsen. His daughter Emily Reynolds is with us tonight, so grateful to have the history of this important chair represented in a significant way. We at Brigham Young University are committed to the project of religious understanding and interfaith harmony, not merely as a kind of amicable exercise in mutual civility, but as a matter of deep religious principle. In a 1790 letter to the Jewish congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, President George Washington wrote that it is now no more that toleration is spoken of. He suggested that toleration was an insufficient principle to guide religious liberty in the United States, that instead religious freedom needed to be built on a large and liberal basis, he said. And we hope to do that. We're committed. We enjoy and are grateful for the religious liberty that's afforded by the U.S. Constitution, but with that liberty comes a stewardship and an obligation to allow for the full flourishing of religious belief and exercise. Our founding prophet, Joseph Smith, said that we need to be as zealous in the defense of the religious rights and liberties of others as we are in defense of our own rights. And I see this lecture series and the Richard L. Evans Chair as a wonderful contribution to that founding principle of our faith. And I love the term religious understanding, which has a depth that goes far beyond the toleration that President Washington said we needed to transcend in the New Republic. Grateful to have Rabbi Garraway with us. You might not know this, but the synagogue he attends in Pasadena, California, was recently burned in the terrible fires that have decimated California, and we're just really grateful to have him with us, and our thoughts and our prayers go out deeply to everybody that's been affected by these fires. And I see it as a sign of resilience and the resilience that's marked the Jewish people for forever. That we have him here with us to share in this important lecture. So thank you. Welcome to everyone. A special welcome to Rabbi Garraway.
It's really an honor to be able to present to you tonight my friend and colleague, Rabbi Joshua D. Garraway. Rabbi Garraway is the Sol and Arlene Bronstein Professor of Judeo-Christian Studies and Professor of Early Christianity in the Second Commonwealth at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in Los Angeles, California. Garraway began his education earning a bachelor's in religious studies at Duke University before pursuing rabbinical ordination at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. He then went on to earn a PhD in religious studies, specializing in the study of the New Testament at Yale University. His doctoral dissertation became his first monograph, Paul's Gentile Jews, Neither Jew nor Gentile, but both. While scholars have commonly called Paul's communities of Gentile Christ followers simply Christians, Garraway warns us of the anachronism. In Paul's own letters, he never called them Christians. And as Garraway makes clear, Paul himself seems to have wrestled with the hybrid identity of these new, to use Garraway's term, Gentile Jews. In his second monograph, The Beginning of the Gospel, Paul, Philippi, and the Origins of Christianity, Garraway continued to think about Paul's historical situation, in particular about the innovation of welcoming Gentiles into a Jewish community without the obligation to practice the law of Moses. This is the origin, Garraway argues, of the term gospel. This was the good news for Gentiles. While much of Rabbi Garraway's scholarship is focused on the historical moment of the Apostle Paul and the formation of early Christianity, he does not shy away from addressing challenges faced by religious peoples today. Recently, Garraway co-edited a book titled These Truths We Hold, Judaism in an Age of Truthiness. Alluding to the Declaration of Independence, these truths we hold to be self-evident, this book examines how postmodern relativism, the spread of misinformation with new technologies, and political polarization have challenged the very notion of truth in our day. This collection of essays suggests that the quest for absolute truth itself can provide a stabilizing anchor in our turbulent times. Garraway is also committed to interfaith dialogue. In fact, this is not Rabbi Garraway's first time on campus. Back around 2017, he began participating in a Jewish and Latter-day Saint dialogue that eventually resulted in a book co-edited by Rabbi Mark Diamond and our very own Andrew Reed. This book, titled Covenants and Communities, Jews and Latter-day Saints in Dialogue, was co-published by BYU's Religious Studies Center and the Central Conference of American Rabbis. That was a first for us at BYU. All of this makes Rabbi Garraway an important voice for the 8th annual World Interfaith Harmony Week lecture here at Brigham Young University. But it is more than his scholarship that makes him an ideal speaker. It is also his character. I first met Josh at Yale, within a semester or two of arriving to pursue my master's in biblical studies. I don't remember what class we were in together, but I do remember joining him on a handful of long walks from Yale's main campus up the hill to the Divinity School. Most often, we would talk about some technical aspect of our study of the New Testament or some new theory one of us had come up with, usually him. I don't remember the particulars of any of those conversations. What stayed with me was simply this, that a Yale PhD student, years ahead of me, would be willing to dialogue with someone who had just barely arrived in the master's program, that he would see me and show interest in my ideas. In the Jewish and Latter-day Saint book I mentioned moments ago, Josh wrote the following regarding interfaith dialogue. Ultimately, I think Jews would like to be seen by Christians, and Christians by Jews, and all people by other people, as living, breathing people with the same sorts of struggles, fears, and aspirations as anyone else. As Latter-day Saints, we look forward to the day when, as it says in the Doctrine and Covenants, we may see as we are seen and know as we are known, together in the presence of God. In the meantime, one way to work towards this mutual seeing and knowing is through interfaith dialogue. I look forward to learning from Rabbi Garraway tonight as he presents his remarks titled Old and New Wineskins, Dealing with Supersessionism in Interreligious Discourse. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Joshua D. Garraway.
Too lovely. So thank you, Jason, for that introduction. I feel like I don't even want to talk. Maybe we can just go home on that. I feel like I have an accomplished career. And by the way, I remember what class it was. I think it was Harry Attrich's John seminar. I know that it met at 4:15 in the Religious Studies building, and here's why that's funny. Whoever was presenting that day had to bring a spirit to share with the class. Some beer, some liquor, a bottle of wine, and we knew that Jason was going to be presenting in November or something, and we were kind people, so we got together. Someone needs to tell Jason that, like, if he just brings, some Coke or even some water or even nothing, like, we all get it, we'll understand. And we hired my friend Mike Peppard. We're like, you talk to Jason, make sure he knows he doesn't have to bring beer on Wednesday afternoon. I don't remember what came of it, but I remember that very vividly. So thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Jessica, for the prayer. Thank you, Justin. I should tell you that on the wall in my office is a copy of George Washington's letter of 1790 to the Newport Congregation of Jews. My favorite line is he refers to America in a famous expression as giving to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance, and that slogan would dominate the American approach towards Jews, and it very much has. I'll also tell you, and this is for students, I teach a Jewish history beginning to end at the University of Southern California, and on the final exam, I give them a list of about 20 sources that they might have to identify on the final exam. And I always pick one that they then have to identify and write about. Every year, I pick George Washington's letter to the Newport congregation. They don't know that. So if I see on social media, everybody in JS 100 at USC get ready for Washington's letter, I will know it was someone in here. And I think there's some kind of honor code, so don't do that. Okay. I especially want to thank Andy, who has been a friend and a colleague for many years now. And every time I come to BYU, it's just the warmest, friendliest, kindest place, which is why I love coming. And Andy is the epitome of that and has just been a wonderful host, so thank you very much. Last prefatory remark. I wrote 5,000 words. I think that's going to take me about 46 minutes. I always like to tell people how long I'm going to speak for, so that if after 10 or 15 minutes you're like, this is the most horrible thing ever, when is it over? You'll know. It's going to be over in about 46 minutes. If, however, at the end of 40 minutes you're like, this is better than Space Mountain, I do not want to get off this ride, alas, after about 46 minutes, it's going to be over. And then I understand that we are going to have some questions. So let's begin. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. Actually, a small, heavily Jewish town just to the east of Rochester called Brighton, a stone's throw from the boyhood home of Joseph Smith. If Google Maps is to be trusted, 19.8 miles by foot separate my boyhood home from his. We are both Erie Canal kids. Indeed, I believe the canal first serviced Palmyra in 1823, the very year Joseph Smith is said to have uncovered the golden plates on the hill Cumorah. I like to open with that biographical nugget whenever I address an audience of Latter-day Saints in the hope that it might afford me some measure of what the kids today call street cred. I imagine saints are more apt to listen to a lecture from a man nourished by the same Genesee River watershed as the prophet himself, even if he did so before Eastman Kodak laced it with a century's worth of silver halides. And so, by the way, Eastman Kodak was a film company, kids. If at the end of this lecture you find it lacking, let's just blame it on the lingering effects of those silver deposits in my brain. Now, growing up, I was hardly unaware of Latter-day Saints. There was a church down the road from me, and every grade in our public schools had at least half a dozen saints. One such student I remember especially well because at the tender age of 9, I learned from her an insight about life and about Judaism that remains with me to the present day. Her name was Emily, and we were teammates in a 4th grade science competition. Now, I'd be lying if I said I remember what the competition was about or what sort of project we made. All I remember is being distraught in the end at having earned only 2nd place. My teammate offered good counsel, however. She said, and I can hear it today as if it were yesterday, "Don't worry, Josh. Remember, 1st is worst, 2nd is best, and 3rd is the one with the hairy chest." Apparently, this little aphorism was rather common in the 1980s. I heard it first from Emily. Now, I recall being comforted by it, but also a bit vexed, wondering why, of all things, would the 3rd place finisher have a hairy chest? We're in 4th grade, for crying out loud. Do Mormons have some fascination with hairy chests? Maybe that's why they have so many kids. And to this day, I wonder whether that hairy chest is thought to be better than the best, or worse than the worst, or something in between. Now, obviously, BYU and Andy did not bring me all the way in from Los Angeles to hear my musings on the relative merits of chest hair. So I'd like to draw our focus to only the first 2/3 of that aphorism, because it is these words that contain the insight that has had, for me at least, enduring importance. 1st is worst, 2nd is best. To explain why this dictum remains an important part of my thinking as a historian, as a Jew, and as a rabbi, I trust you will not object to my raising our discourse several orders of intellectual magnitude from the taunts of a 4th grader to the Harvard Law Review. The 1983 volume of the Harvard Law Review opened with a groundbreaking article by Yale law professor Robert Cover called Nomos and Narrative. Cover argues that a community's legal system comprises more than simply the laws and the statutes that are on its books. Such laws, he suggests, are deeply intertwined with the stories a community tells itself about its identity, its history, and its values. Laws cannot be interpreted nor applied apart from this broader community nomos, the Greek term Cover uses to describe the ever-evolving legal construct a community generates through its combination of laws and stories. Now, for those of you who have no idea what I just said, And frankly, I often lose track of what I am saying when I teach Robert Cover because his ideas are so complicated and his prose even more so. For those who did not follow, allow me to clarify Cover's point by drawing on one of the real-world examples Cover himself deploys. I trust you will appreciate this example. You see, Cover was a learned Jew. And so for his example, he points to the Bible, that collection of laws and stories assembled by the ancient Israelites. Cover focuses in particular on the Bible's curious description of inheritance. On the one hand, Cover observes the Bible's laws of inheritance. In Deuteronomy 21, for example, the Bible's laws make it clear that Israel practiced some version of primogeniture. The firstborn son received a double share of his father's estate. In other words, to be born first was not worst. First was best. And yet, when one looks at the stories of the Bible, and especially in the book of Genesis, one is struck by the frequency with which second-born sons triumph. Abel, the second-born, is preferred by God over Cain. Isaac, the second-born, is preferred by God over Ishmael. Jacob, the second-born, is preferred by God over Esau. Ephraim, the second-born, is preferred by Jacob over Manasseh. And were one to expand the category to include younger brothers generally, not necessarily second-borns, who outshine their older brothers, we would encounter luminaries no less important than Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, and of course, Donny Osmond. It's my joke for the older people here. According to the narratives in Genesis, first is indeed worst. Second is best. But why? Why are the Bible's stories at such odds with its laws when it comes to inheritance? For Cover, the discrepancy points to a unique outlook in Israelite civilization. Israelite society, he says, was more willing than was its neighbors to tolerate exceptions to primogeniture. As a norm, yes, Israelites expected that firstborn sons would inherit a double portion. But unlike other ancient nations, the Israelites also acknowledged that on occasion, primogeniture could be, indeed ought to be, overturned. Every now and then, the Israelites believed the divine hand of destiny would determine that the order of inheritance should be reversed, a divine will revealed through oracles or miracles or the like. But again, one might ask, why? Why were the Israelites so eager to anticipate breaches in primogeniture willed by God? Why the fascination with the triumph of the second-born? And here Cover observes what historians of ancient Israel have laid bare for generations, namely, that the Israelites were keenly aware of their own youthfulness as a civilization. In the landscape of ancient Near Eastern kingdoms, the Israelites were new kids on the block. No, not the 80s boy band that Emily and I probably listened to as we worked on our second-place science project, but new kids on the block, a young Johnny-come-lately nation seeking earnestly to find a place among the local heavyweights. Egypt was older. Babylonia was older. The Hittites were older. The Canaanites were older. And the Israelites knew it. And so the Israelites told themselves, we might not have been first, but who cares? Because first is worst, second is the best. And they pointed to the stories from their past to justify that claim. Just as God had preferred Abel to Cain, Just as God had preferred Isaac to Ishmael and Jacob to Esau, so God now prefers the Johnny-come-lately Israelites to the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Canaanites. First is worst, second is best. Perhaps no other principle was etched so indelibly on the Israelite consciousness as this one. To be first, to be older, ultimately means nothing once God has decreed that a newer, younger, favored nation shall emerge. And yet, as I hope to demonstrate in the remainder of my remarks this evening, this brilliant insight that justified Israel's self-confidence among the nations, first is worst, second is the best, would over time become a source of endless tragedy for the Jewish people. Why so? Because however much first is worst, second is best exalted the newbie Israelites over the long-standing ancient kingdoms, it ultimately hoisted Israel with its own petard. For those wondering what it means to be hoisted with your own petard, it is a phrase from Hamlet that means to plant a bomb that blows up in your face. For those wondering why I would use such an obscure Shakespearean phrase rather than simply say, blow up in your face, it is because a colleague bet me $5 that I could never find the opportunity to include the phrase hoist with one's own petard in a public lecture. For what it's worth, that same colleague owes me another $5 because I found a way to fit the Osmond brothers into a lecture at BYU. I know that gambling is a bit of a no-no, but I hope you'll forgive me that $10. Provo is proving to be quite lucrative for me. I should also tell you, I go to Santa Anita Racetrack a lot. It's right near Pasadena. They race horses, and I only bet $2 a race. I don't have a problem. But there was one time where there was a horse in the race called Nauvoo is best. Nauvoo is best. And I was like, well, I got Andy, Sean, my friends up at BYU. I'm betting on Nauvoo is best. And she won. And so I took a picture of the score thing that said Nauvoo is best, paid $7.20 or whatever. And I texted it to Andy and Sean, and then I was like, uh-oh. I don't think they want to know that I'm thinking of them while I'm gambling at the racetrack. But Jewish Latter-day Saint dialogue continued despite that moment. So in what way, then, did first is worst, second is best, ultimately hoist the Jewish people by its own petard? In what way did it blow up in the face of the Jewish people? Well, because it was inevitable that eventually some other group would come along claiming that it was now the new kid on the block. It was the fresh-faced youngster preferred by God over the now hoary Jewish people. And it goes without saying that the most noteworthy such group to make such a claim would be the Christians of the 1st and 2nd century. Already in the letters of Paul is the logic of ancient Israel turned against the Jews. In the 4th chapter of his epistle to the Galatians, for example, Paul flips the script on Ishmael and Isaac. Jews who adhere to the Torah delivered at Mount Sinai are identified as Ishmael, the son of Hagar, whose slavery is now experienced by Jews in the earthly Jerusalem. But Christians, for lack of a better word, whom Paul dubs the children of the promise, they are Isaac, the son of Sarah, whose freedom is now experienced by Christians in the Jerusalem above. The 9th through 11th chapters of Paul's epistle to the Romans suggest a similar switcheroo. If God preferred the younger Isaac to the older Ishmael, and the younger Jacob to the older Esau, Paul writes, how could anyone be scandalized by the suggestion that Jews are now being outstripped by their little brothers, namely the droves of Christians now being grafted into Israel's family tree? After all, Paul insists, Jews themselves are the ones who said that God works in such a remarkable and mysterious way. First is worst, second is best. Now, what was nascent in Paul's letters would find more developed expression in the Gospels, and by the 2nd century was well on its way to forging a fully fledged doctrine of supersessionism. Supersessionism, simply put, is the idea that Christians have taken the place of Israel. Sometimes it is called replacement theology, inasmuch as it insists that Christians have replaced Jews as God's covenanted people. Now, whether this idea was born as early as Paul, as I have suggested, or first found expression in the Gospel of Luke, or in 2nd century thinkers like Justin Martyr or Tertullian, no one disputes that it had become a central doctrine of the church by the turn of the 5th century, when none other than St. Augustine wrote, Populus ergo Christianus Magis Israel. The Christian people is Israel. And he would go on to say that Jews, quote, condemned because of their perfidiousness, sold their primogenitura, sold their right of the firstborn, so that they do not belong to Jacob, but rather to the firstborn Esau. In Augustine, the reversal is complete. The Jews have been hoisted with their own petard. The repercussions of supersessionism over the next 15 centuries cannot be underestimated. Until the French Revolution, and in many times and places even thereafter, Jewish life in Christian Europe was generally calamitous. From the Spanish Visigoths in the 7th century to the Byzantine Empire in the East, from the Rhineland in the 11th and 12th centuries with the murderous crusades, accusations of blood libel, host desecration, and poisoning of wells, to the Inquisition and the expulsions from Western Europe, the Khmelnytsky massacres in 17th century Poland, and the Counter-Reformation ghettos in early modern Italy. Jews were a despised and persecuted minority. True, there were times when Jews were able to find comfort for a time, even to thrive for a time. But invariably, these moments of respite concluded in some sort of expulsion or massacre or forced baptism. I cannot imagine any Jew today wishing they could transport themselves back to medieval times, which is precisely the excuse I give my children when they request that I take them to medieval times dinner theater in Orange County. I love horses, don't get me wrong, you know that. But Jews don't purposely do anything or go anywhere called medieval times, and for good reason. And why were Jews so despised in medieval times? It's really quite simple. If, on Christian reckoning, God despised the Jewish people, God had rejected the Jews as a covenant people and transferred their privileges and promises to Christianity, why would Christians approach Jews with any demeanor other than complete and utter revulsion? Fortunately, modernity has brought about a profound change in the experience of Jews in historically Christian lands. That change did not come about easily. It might have, and quite frankly, it looked as though it was going to, as Western Europe underwent the transformative Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Jews and liberal Christians alike believed that an enlightened Europe, replete with democracy and science and ethical universalism, would bring about a universal brotherhood of mankind. That dream died at Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. But in the wake of the Holocaust it is true that Christians across a slew of denominations have begun to rethink their historical animosity towards the Jewish people. The supersessionism that dominated Christian theology for centuries has become a source of shame and embarrassment for many in the contemporary Christian world. Now, I do not mean to say that supersessionism has been abandoned, hardly so. There remain Christians across the Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox landscapes who remain committed to the supersessionism inherited from the past. No less so, there are many Christians across that same landscape who, in response to the tragic consequences of supersessionism that culminated in the Holocaust, have sought to mitigate Christian supersessionism. There are even Christians who have sought to discard supersessionism altogether. Now, as you can imagine, I lament the first of these alternatives, the continuation of medieval supersessionist thinking about Jews. It might surprise you to hear, however, that I also lament the last of these alternatives, the complete abandonment of supersessionism. And I'm hardly alone among Jews who believe that Christians have every right to believe that Christianity offers a continuation of Israelite religion that is superior to Judaism, to believe that Jesus really was the Messiah, that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and that any religious community, even one that enjoys a historic covenanted relationship with God, is nonetheless incomplete if it fails to acknowledge what God accomplished in the world through Jesus Christ. I may not believe what you believe, but I believe you have every right to believe it. Now, what I am describing here is something that Rabbi David Novak, Emeritus Professor of Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto, has called a distinction between hard supersessionism, soft supersessionism, and non-supersessionism. Hard supersession refers to the standard medieval refrain: God has chosen Christians to replace Jews as God's covenant people. Christians are the true Israel. Soft supersession, on the other hand, while it insists that Christianity is preferable to Judaism, one might even say superior to Judaism, nonetheless acknowledges that Jews remain in a covenanted relationship with God despite their unwillingness to admit Christ as their Savior. To explain soft supersessionism, Rabbi Novak uses the metaphor of a home renovation. Christianity is like the new second story added to a Jewish home. Jews remain in the home, as there is no reason to displace them, but they reside on the older, lower floor, which presumably lacks the gleaming hardwood floors and the state-of-the-art quartz tabletops of the second story. Personally, I prefer to draw a metaphor from something I know a bit more about: video games. A soft supersessionist might say that Christianity represents the updated, newer version of Judaism, the 2.0 version, with better graphics and more options. And yet, video game enthusiasts will confirm that there remains something appealing about the OG, the original game, as it were. It's vintage, it's a classic, even if a better version has now arrived. So that is hard and soft supersessionism. Non-supersessionism is the view that Christianity is no better than Judaism at all. It's simply different, an alternative. Judaism and Christianity are two religions that differ in belief and practice and history, but which are qualitatively the same. Now, Rabbi Novak correctly observes that Jewish dialogue with Christians proves pointless when it is carried out with the first option or with the third. The hard supersessionists or the non-supersessionists. Hard supersessionists simply cannot accept Jews on their own terms. Judaism has no inherent value, no theological validity, and the only correct course of action is for Jews to be baptized. For Jews to converse with such Christians will invariably prove fruitless. With non-supersessionists, by contrast, dialogue is pointless because the relationship contains no tension. Interreligious dialogue is enriching precisely because it is difficult and challenging and forces us to think deeply about others and ourselves and grow as a result. Jews are unlikely to grow by conversing with Christians who cannot cogently explain why they are Christians and not Jews, why Christianity is, in some sense at least, an improvement upon Judaism. Soft supersessionism, then, is like the baby bear's porridge or a chair or bed in which Goldilocks so delights. It's just right. It is supersessionist insofar as it insists that Christianity is a newer, superior alternative to Judaism, worthy of a Christian's conviction. Yet it is also a soft supersessionism inasmuch as it insists that Judaism retains a validity, a historical purpose, and a unique relationship with God. Of course, there is no single version of soft supersessionist Christianity out there. It comes in many flavors. Near as I can tell, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a soft supersessionist Christianity. Now, I am loath to stand in front of a large hall here at Brigham Young University and tell a room full of Latter-day Saints what they believe. I did once spend 3 hours on a Sunday morning at a church here in Orem with Bishop Hopkin, but I doubt that qualifies me as an expert. I also played basketball regularly at the Mormon church growing up, where I learned that, by the way, young Mormon men are not so keen on the notion that first is worst and second is best. There were a lot of elbows to make that point. I don't think that makes me an expert either. Nonetheless, I feel confident in saying that the Book of Mormon consistently teaches the necessity for all people, both Jews and Gentiles, to accept Jesus as the Messiah. To me, that sounds like supersessionism. Yet I also feel confident in saying that the Book of Mormon teaches that Jews are God's covenant people who have a special mission to complete in the world today, and that there will be an eventual reconciliation of God to his covenant people. That sounds to me like a softened supersessionism, a view of Christian superiority that nonetheless leaves room for the ongoing value and purpose of the Jewish community. And by the way, I feel confident making those claims about the Book of Mormon because they are not my claims. I lifted them from this excellent volume, Understanding Covenants and Communities, Jews and Latter-day Saints in Dialogue, from an article called Supersessionism and Latter-day Saint Thought, authored by BYU professors and my colleagues in dialogue, Jared Ludlow, Andrew Reed, and Sean Hopkin. That, my friends, is a threefold imprimatur. That's a fancy word that Catholics use to mean it's all good. I suspect that it is precisely the softness of Latter-day Saint supersessionism that has allowed my dialogue with Jared and Andy and Sean and many others to have proven so fruitful. The modern-day Catholic Church has also become, on record at least, a soft supersessionist church, even if among its ranks there remain some hardliners. The revolutionary moment in Catholicism came with the publication of Nostra Aetate, the statement emanating from the Second Vatican Council in 1965, in which the Church reconsidered its relationship with other religions of the world. In Nostra Aetate, the Church offers pronouncements that would have been unthinkable in preceding centuries. It says, for example, that although the Church is the new people of God, the Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, as if this followed from the Holy Scriptures. The Church is the new people of God. Well, that sounds to me like supersessionism. Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, and elsewhere Nostra Aetate says that God holds the Jews most dear for the sake of their fathers. These statements sound to me like a soft supersessionism, and therefore it should come as no surprise that Jewish Catholic dialogue has grown by leaps and bounds over the past 60 years. And naturally, soft supersessionism has made strides in contemporary Protestant communities as well. Now, here I am not talking about evangelical dispensationalism in Reformed traditions, whose origins trace back to the 17th century, and which sees for Jews an ongoing historical purpose insofar as they return to the land of Israel in order to precipitate the return of Christ. That is not an honest engagement with Jews, but a manipulative approach that views Jews as little more than cogs in a grand Christian plan. I'm thinking rather of Protestants like the acclaimed theologian from Princeton called George Hunsiger, whose excellent works include this short article from a 2015 issue of Commonweal magazine entitled "What Christians Owe Jews: The Case for a Soft Supersessionism." Hunsiger, a Presbyterian minister, draws on the work of the renowned theologian Karl Barth to read the New Testament, and especially the letters of Paul, in a manner that evinces a soft supersessionist perspective. He describes that perspective in terms that are both clear and poignant. Soft supersessionism, he writes, and this is beautiful. Soft supersessionism asserts that the new covenant does not replace the old covenant, but rather fulfills, extends, supplements, and fundamentally confirms it. There is only one covenant, and thus only one people of God, and yet there are two faiths. The presence of two faiths, and this is what I think is beautiful, faiths that are in some ways diametrically opposed, represents a festering wound in the one people of God. Neither Christians nor Jews know how to heal this wound. Only God does. Now, I find myself moved by Professor Hunsiger's description of soft supersessionism, his insistence that Jews and Christians together constitute one people of God, but that their opposition to one another within the people of God is like a festering wound, a brokenness that neither side has figured out how to repair. I disagree with Hunsiger, however, when he says that it is God alone who knows how to repair that lesion. My experience in Jewish-Christian dialogue suggests that thoughtful Jews and thoughtful Christians today have the capacity to at least initiate the repair, to begin the process of healing, even if ultimately an act of God might be required to effect a full and final reconciliation. As tragic and painful, then, as Christian supersessionism has been for Jews across the centuries, I hope my remarks this evening have indicated that I do not believe supersessionism constitutes a non-starter in Jewish-Christian dialogue. Hard supersessionism, yes, but not a softened supersessionism that leaves room for the ongoing validity and vitality of Judaism. A supersessionism that does not say first is worst and second is best, but perhaps Second is best, but first is okay too. Now, I would like to conclude this evening by noting that productive Jewish-Christian dialogue is made possible not only by a revision in medieval attitudes on the part of Christians. Jews, too, can find themselves theologically stuck in medieval modes of thought that prevent fruitful exchange. Our stumbling block is not supersessionism, obviously. Jews do not claim to have superseded Christians. When it comes to Christianity, and Islam for that matter, the medieval Jewish refrain is rather just the opposite of the biblical formula. First is worst. First is worst. Second, I don't know why I wrote here. First is worst, second is second. It's the opposite in that Jews will say first is best and second is worst. For Jews, it is first is best, second is worst. Judaism came first, and it is best. Christianity and Islam came next, and they are little more than regrettable counterfeit imitators. The stumbling block for Jews then is not supersessionism, but what I would call disregard. Disregard for Christianity as ever having had any religious significance whatsoever. Since Jesus never rose from the dead, many Jews think, the whole Christian enterprise is just plain wrong. It's irrelevant. And just as hard supersessionism endures among many Christians today, there remains a hard disregard for Christianity. And such Jews, in my view, cannot be productive participants in interreligious discourse. But just the same, there are plenty of contemporary Jews, and I include myself among them, who have a soft disregard for Christianity. It is a disregard insofar as Christianity is seen as a later, inferior, and incomplete expression of Judaism. And yet, it is a soft disregard insofar as Christianity is nonetheless thought to have enduring validity and vitality. Christianity matters. Christianity and Islam, for that matter, have an important role in the grand scheme of history. Now, that soft disregard takes many forms, and a deep dive is not possible tonight, given the limited time remaining. With my final words tonight, however, I'd like to introduce you to just one example of soft Jewish disregard for Christianity. What I think is the most elegant expression of soft disregard for Christianity. And surprisingly, it is not new. It does not come from some sort of modern liberal Jew whom you might expect to have an open-minded approach to Christianity. It comes rather from Moses Maimonides, perhaps the most highly regarded Jewish intellectual of the medieval period, a true giant. Now, Maimonides was born in the year 1135. As a boy, he fled from Spain following the rise of an intolerant Muslim regime. He crossed North Africa, settling eventually in Egypt, where he worked as a physician in the Islamic court and soon developed a reputation as a thinker of unrivaled capability, a master of both medieval philosophy and of Jewish law. In the penultimate, maybe I breathe too much when I speak. Sorry about that. When I took singing lessons, they said it's important to breathe, otherwise it won't sound right, but if you breathe into this, it makes funny noises. In the penultimate chapter of his massive code of Jewish law called the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides reflects upon the merits of the two religious communities that had succeeded Judaism and taken over the world as he knew it. Islam to the south of the Mediterranean, Christianity to the north. Toward both religions, Maimonides shows the expected disregard. Christianity in particular, he laments for its misidentification of the Messiah as Jesus and the exaltation of Jesus to divine status, which ultimately led Christians astray from proper worship of the one true God. However, Maimonides goes on to explain that his disregard is a soft one. Why so? Allow me to read Maimonides in his own words. And here the problem is the font is small. He writes, V'kol hadavarim ha'elu shel Yeshua ha'notzri, that's Jesus of Nazareth, v'shel zeh ha'yishmaeli she'amad acharav, that's Muhammad, einan ela leyasher derech lamelech ha'moshiach, u'litakein et ha'ulam kulo la'avod et adoshem b'yachad. All the deeds of Jesus of Nazareth and of the Ishmaelite who came after him have only served to expedite the coming of the Messiah, to improve the entire world so that it will worship God together. That expression, to improve the entire world, is in Hebrew the phrase tikkun olam, a popular phrase in Jewish parlance today referring to a Jew's sense of obligation to repair the brokenness of the world. Here, Maimonides says, in no uncertain terms, that Christians and Muslims partner with Jews in that task. How so? Muslims, he says, share the Jews' rigorous commitment to monotheism. And so, as they spread across North Africa and the Middle East, Muslims carry forth with them the foundational principle of monotheism. The problem with Muslims, according to Maimonides, is that they reject the authority of the Bible, believing as they do that it had become corrupted and required replacement with the prophecy of Muhammad. But this is precisely where Christians enter the picture. The commitment to monotheism, well, it's questionable, according to Maimonides, on account of the Trinity, but for their part, Christians adhere rigorously to the moral message of the Hebrew Bible, their Old Testament. And so, as they spread across Europe, Christians carry with them into the world the biblical, prophetic, moral message. As such, Muslims and Christians are truly fixing the world in Jewish eyes. And when the Messiah does eventually arrive, the majority of the world will be prepared to join Jews in serving God together as one brotherhood of mankind. All of those rigorously monotheistic Muslims will realize the moral message of the Bible was in fact pure. All those moral Christians will realize that Jesus had not been the Messiah and is not God. And on that day, as Jews recite 3 times daily in a prayer called Aleinu, quote, every inhabitant of the world will recognize and know that to God every knee must bend and every tongue swear loyalty. On that day, God will be one and God's name will be one. Is that a triumphalist message? You bet it is. It presumes that one day the world will be redeemed once everybody realizes that Jews all along were right. But it's no less triumphant than Christian supersessionism, which presumes that one day all the world will be redeemed when everyone comes to realize that Christians all along were right. What I have tried to suggest this evening is that such triumphalism, whether it is Christian supersessionism or Jewish disregard, is not problematic in and of itself, nor need it stifle fruitful interreligious dialogue. What is required is simply a measure of softness, a softness in theology combined with a softness in heart and a softness in character. These are the ingredients for productive interreligious exchange. And I am so delighted to say that I have experienced such softness in spades in the Latter-day Saints Jewish dialogue I have shared with BYU professors for almost 10 years now. Would that every committed Jew and every committed Latter-day Saint indeed every committed Muslim and every committed Christian, benefit from the same such endeavor. Thank you.